Welcome in, everyone. Thank you so much for being with us live today. And for those that aren't live with us today, thanks for listening in and tuning into our conversation. I am Krista Berry. I am delighted to be coming to you as the Strategic Partnerships Lead at Luna Experience. I'm really excited about today's conversation. This meeting of all of us has been virtual the whole time, which is such a delight to be working in a space where we've had other connections together, but we essentially have met through LinkedIn. So thanks, LinkedIn. At Luna, a little bit about Luna. At Luna, our mission is to help nonprofit professionals grow, connect, and lead with purpose, which is what all of you do. And this is exactly why our speakers are here. And we know that data is at the center of so much of that work, right? Even when it doesn't feel that way, every program that you run, every intake form that you all collect, every spreadsheet, this is the nonprofit's joke of the amount of spreadsheets that we have. Every spreadsheet that's sitting somewhere in a drive is a part of your story. So you already know that and you're already telling it, but it's really about whether your audience as an individual donor or foundation program officer or someone that you're working with in a partnership like the city, are they hearing all the stories of all that? So Olivia and Charles, you wrote this recently in a line, and it's really kind of stuck with me. As you put it, it's not a technology gap when we're talking about data, it's a communication gap. Ooh, I got chills about that because in this time when we're like so bombarded with what technology can do for us and how technology can solve this for us, I felt like this was such a perfect time to really have this conversation with you. I love that you kind of frame that with most nonprofits having what they need already, which is not something that I feel like is the message that is coming at us on a daily basis from people that kind of want to sell us things, right? So I'm as I was just sharing with our host, I'm here to learn with all of you as well today. I love that framing. I love anything that's centered in abundance mindset for our nonprofit sector and not always thinking scarcity or what we need more of, especially at a time when we're all kind of spare on resources. And so to think that we might be able to actually fundraise and do our work better with what we already have is a very exciting conversation. So back to my notes for a second here. We're going to talk about that gap and how to close it today for a lot of you that might be thinking that this is out of reach. I know a lot of our listeners at Luna Experience all are smaller nonprofits that might not always be able to access a lot of the resources. And I love that you both are dedicated to working with the same audience that we are. And that's how this partnership came about. So we don't have any buttoned up decks or TikTok or TED Talks or all the things. That's not how we're doing it here today. We're having an honest conversation, as I know many of you have enjoyed from us at Luna Experience in the past. Okay, this is designed to be interactive. So the chat is down there for those of you who got about 10 minus 3 on, 7 folks on live with us. So feel free to stay interactive and use the chat to share your insights and also ask some questions as we go along. And as they come up, I can check those out and weave them in. Obviously, if you also have any kind of clarifying questions, we want to know it. So without further ado, Olivia Ildefonso, yay, is the co-founder of North Arrow. They are a data and mapping consultancy that helps mission-driven organizations just like all of you turn their program data into clear geographic narratives. Oof, I love it. And Charles Grosverin.
Perfect.
No.
Better than I
French for a second. She was like, I took French in high school. Grosverin is the co-founder as well. And what Charles does is helps the nonprofits really bridge your program data and the public data sets. Want to learn more about all of that to better understand community needs, right? To really think about what you need in order to be funded, and then to really sharpen the funding case. All things that we need right now because everybody needs money. I just wrote a blog post yesterday and I was doing a consulting engagement. And I'm like, listen, there's not a nonprofit that I've ever met that hasn't need money. So how do we start framing and assessing what we have in order to do that? So thank you so much, Charles and Olivia, for being here. We're so excited that this is how this partnership has evolved.
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting us to this conversation. It's always such a pleasure for us to get to reach more nonprofits. We're looking forward to, yeah, the Q&A at the end to see what brought folks here and to really, help from a high level. Our entire mission is to help nonprofits become more data driven, because at the end of the day, that's what they all want. But we operate in a sector where that's never really been funded, right? So you're asking them to do the impossible. Well, they're to do it, but without the resources. So that's what makes it the impossible for a lot of nonprofits. So we're really excited to give some very practical tips and tricks of exactly what this topic is about, how to start leveraging the data they already have to make their case for impact.
I love that. And I think that's a perfect segue into, one of the first questions I have, Olivia, is when you sit down with a nonprofit for the first time or at any point in that, engagement, what data do they usually have? Like, this is like, I'm like on the edge of my seat that they don't realize is valuable.
Yeah, well, I started my career leading programs and research for a racial justice policy and advocacy organization, right? Where I really think this is one of the most difficult contexts to work in when funders or anyone is wanting to know your impact, because we are trying to change policies. We are addressing structural racism, but it's not every day we get a policy passed, right? And every single time we do, which was once every several years, what do you do in the years in between? How do you report on your impact and what you're doing day to day, which is a ton of work, right? So
Hmm.
how do you look at that work that you're doing through a data lens of thinking about it? So the term that we use are impact indicators, right? What are your impact indicators? The changing the policy can be your North Star goals, your long-term impact, but there's all the things, the impact that you're having along the way that allows for that to culminate and that to happen. So
Mm.
things as boring as newsletter opens. That
Oh, yeah.
is
I was like, tell us the boring stuff, Olivia.
super,
Newsletter
super
opens,
boring.
engagement.
Yeah, I mean, it's political education, it's raising consciousness, it's laying the foundation for what you need to engage people and then to get them to act to change these policies, right?
Mm.
So all of that boring stuff day to day can are things that can be tracked that can make the case for your impact. So in our case, it was, looking at things like um, website visits, newsletter opening, folks that show up when we have a conference. What neighborhoods are they coming from that they're representing? It is a diverse mix, a diverse coalition that we're working in, and diversity in
Mm.
all types of things. When we're building out our racial justice, partnership, is it obviously racial diversity, but also of all ages from all neighborhoods. So there's a lot you can do even with an attendance spreadsheet, or a couple of
Yeah.
them to talk about who are the people what is the network that you're growing, right? And that being a form of impact, this network that you're increasingly bringing people into the fold of care, learning more about racial inequities and starting to make changes in their day to day, in their work, in their, showing up. So for us, as a policy organization, we really had to be creative of how we were talking about and measuring our impact. And like I said, the data already existed. And this is what we see time and time again with human service organizations we work with. They Something as simple as their program data. Where do they have their programs? Why are they located in these particular neighborhoods? So mapping out
Mm.
the program data on a map, an actual digital map, and then layering in, this is what we do all the time, public data on need. So there's tons and tons of public data on need, community data from the census, from the CDC, from departments of education, all of these things that you can map, housing cost burden, poverty, even obesity rates, whatever it is that you're working on, that exists as public data. So you map that and then you map your program locations, and 9 out of 10 times you will see that correlation that you're working in areas where the need is highest, right? And
I
this
love
is
it. After years of teaching people about how to fundraise, and I know we've got some other fundraising experts on here with us, and essentially creating like strong proposals for foundations. it always like was something that I realized set a light off and other folks saying like, no, you don't have to create all the data yourself. There's so much public data to make your case or to strengthen your work. And I love that you kind of, reminded folks of that because I do think it's like can feel overwhelming. I just worked with an early stage nonprofit of two founders that are doing really great work, but really need to center their case in other data because they haven't done anything yet, right? But the concept is good, but they haven't done something yet. So I love that kind of like we've got both. And the other thing I'll note on is all the things that you said right there that sound boring are things that even small nonprofits are doing. You're gathering people. Ultimately, you are doing a program and you have all of this information. If you don't have a newsletter, there's other things that you actually most people have a website right now. So thank you for noting those. Tell me a little bit about the difference between, because I know that there's always that like funders need data. And I've seen a lot of nonprofits, especially smaller ones, actually like get into data because the funder's asking for it.
Of
And
course.
I know you've seen that as well. We don't want to always have to do that. But if that's the capacity building reason, good, because it's better for the organization. But tell me about the difference between the data that you're collecting to report to funders, right, and dispel some of those myths versus like what can we really collect as an organization to tell our story. You talked a little bit about that in terms of policy, but how can a small nonprofit understand the difference to like not just do it for the funder?
That's a great question. Yeah, I mean, funders, in defense of funders, they do want to know the same things that a lot of other people want to know and that organizations want to talk about, which is their impact, right? Maybe the particular way the funder is asking for it is not how it translates to a wider audience as nicely. But at the end of the day, the same data can be used to communicate, make your case to the funder as you would make your case to an external, to other types of audiences, right? Maybe you're trying to get volunteers or you're trying to get people to, join your coalition. But, at the end of the day, you can think about that data being very similar as there's the data on need, right? The funders, everyone wants to know what is the problem. So what is the data that shows the problem? What is the data that shows the output? What are you all doing on the day to day? And if you can impact, right? Because a lot of organizations they can't get to the point where they can have the impact data and by that I mean the outcome, not the output. So you can think about what are we
Mhm.
doing is the um, output data. What are we doing day to day? And the outcome data is we move the needle on this thing, right?
Mm.
It's extremely difficult for any nonprofit to say outcome because oftentimes they're dealing with huge issues, food insecurity, right? Like one organization, it's going to be so hard for them for that to show up in any type of public data set from the CDC that you move the needle on food insecurity, right? So I just want like also to tell nonprofits that it's okay. They can breathe. Like,
Mm.
you know, the data that shows the issue, how you've assessed the issue, why this programming is important and what you all are doing is amazing there
Mm.
will be a time down the road that maybe you can show more of that outcome data. If
Mhm.
you start defining it now for yourself and defining those North Star goals. But most of the nonprofits we work with, the story is the need and what we're doing about it. And that
Yeah.
and that is great. And that is what funders want to see. That's what people that care about the issue want to see.
Mm.
And they also want to see you asked about what is different between funders and other audiences. I think also for both, they want to know that you have your finger on the pulse of this issue, right?
Mm.
So not the same story all the time. The it might from a high level look the same, but in the day to day, year to year, context changes, certain things change. There's nuances every single time that we're working on issues related to, inequities, um, social justice, and people that care about that issue, they want to learn more. They want to understand it in a deeper way. So do you have some data that can speak to that, right? What's changed from last year to this year?
I love that you first, thank you for saying what we have is enough. I needed to hear that on a very human level, but also for a lot of our smaller nonprofits that, are kind of founder led in a lot of ways out of passion, that it's also reminding folks that what you have is enough. We do a lot here at Luna talking about, how to use storytelling to, fund your mission, but also to share your impact, right? And I loved how you kind of put that, like, is what you're saying. Let me make sure I'm hearing this, Olivia. Is like what you're saying is that like a story of one person that was impacted through our work is essentially data.
That's definitely data. Yeah. I mean, that's also how you can draw the line if you don't have that type of aggregated data that shows, 58% of the community members that we're working with say that they're housing insecure, right? And then you talk about the data, all of the work that you're doing around that, and you have the numbers to back that up. If you
Mhm.
can't then draw the link on the aggregate level of housing insecurity going down, that's when you bring in the story because the changes exist in the individual level, right? And that is also outcome, but it's at that scale that you can tell.
Mhm. That's so powerful. Because it really, I think that's even the word data, and like even as we were like putting the marketing together for this, I'm like, I want this to feel like it's for everyone. Because even the word data and talking about a lot of this stuff can, to me, just like it feels overwhelming when I think about some of these smaller to mid-size even organizations that have one development director. Maybe that's who's represented here, that is still like doing all the things. I'm going to shift over to you, Charles, because I know we talked a little bit about this kind of public data, data sets, and kind of my grad work in New York. I got into it a little bit. I've in my career moved away from it. So you often work with those layers of just the program data, but also these public data sets that Olivia has set us up for. Can you walk through exactly what that looks like in practice for the organizations that you've worked with?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one really, really important conviction to anchor in this conversation because it happens. It's at the foundation of every data question is actually starting the work with precisely a question. So it's understanding that whenever you're going out to get data and to research data, it has to be driven by purpose and by a driving question, right? So because these driving questions will always inform however you're going to approach this data research. We're lucky enough to operate in a country, the US, that has one of the that's one of the wealthiest in public data, so you can really easily get into a rabbit hole when you're looking for data, um, and find absolutely amazing and deceiving things when you start looking for data. So if you don't frame and scope your data research with a question, like any good researcher, that's like one of the like many easy ways to get a bit lost. And the questions can be wide, right? But like even the difference between what's my reach and how am I moving the needle, which is we already talked over a second ago. Those are two very different questions, right? And if you're thinking about like how my community is trending, that's also a very different question. Um, and those trigger different types of research. So when we
Mm.
think about layering public data and programmatic data, the public data is informed by these questions. And if you're thinking about enriching your understanding of need in your communities, that's going to be looking at what you're trying to solve for and the needs. So it's like, well, I'm working on food insecurity, as we said, like what are the key health outcomes that might inform which granular areas in my community or in my city or in my county are the most affected by food insecurity through the lens of health or income or we have like there's a lot of ways of approaching food insecurity, but those are two main ones, right? And so if the
Mm.
question is how can I enrich my own programmatic data? So where I have my food pantries, where I'm doing my food deliveries. It's also understanding exactly what it looks like in the community, right? So that's like that's that one data point. But if I'm asking a question like what's my reach, then if I'm saying something like well, I have the data point of I've done 1,000 food deliveries in the last month in my county. That's just an X. Maybe what I want to look for is how many people are actually food insecure to be able to get to a reach ratio, right? And so you're like, so what you're looking for is more a population rather than like, it's like how many folks are actually food insecure, so I can measure my ratio of reach, right? And so you're answering two different questions, and that takes you into different directions.
It's so good. It's like what it's coming up for me is like planning, which
Yeah.
often happens when we talk about like fundraising readiness or whatever readiness you're looking to expand. I want to do more programs. How do I do that? Is like this is part of the planning and thinking about what you want to do and kind of working your way back and asking these questions. So when I was first asking it, I was like almost over, like I'm trying to put myself in everyone's shoes here, and I'm like, it's almost like you're overwhelmed with what you don't know exists.
Yeah.
So I think you asked some really key questions there. Not that we need like a laundry list of all the questions you can ask yourself, but that's part of the planning process, is to actually like get to the root of either what you're trying to solve or what story you're trying to tell. Is that a kind of right? Like there's an infinite amount of potential questions and different data sets. I was working with a local arts organization recently, and we were kind of trying to get at like what is their case for support, or what's the beginning of their case for support and need. And even that conversation took a little while and some probing just to get to. And where the founders landed, which was beautiful to see just in a 90-minute session, was around the need for community. And I'm like, well, gosh, there's probably a ton of really cool studies out there, luckily recently, on how that benefits the community to bring, art and community together and what that does for our health. And because we had that conversation, that's how we got to the action item of go do the research to see where those studies are. Is that a similar process? Because I know, okay, I'm thinking of the data that we've shared, census data, community health indicators, local economic data, right? Is that like an idea of how they would start, and where do they go to find that? Do they ask ChatGPT? Do they call you? I think they should call you.
I think any source is valid. I think this is also how we do it with our nonprofit partners. We cast a wide net, so we immerse ourselves in the culture of an organization to understand exactly what it is that they do and their history. And then what we start by doing is really being open-minded about the community outcomes and kind of like listing everything that feels relevant. But then, as a secondary pass, with the nonprofit partner, or obviously like asking them to do that, cap the number of indicators that that they need to select, right? It's like, well, we have 30 to work with, but the job here is to really be hypercritical of these outcomes, because you're going to naturally want to collect everything and then to look at everything, but that's going to be deceiving and create confusion and way too much noise when wanting to tell the story. So like a simple recommendation would be, if you're working on a program, you have an organization that has 3 programs, like try to focus on 1 or 2 indicators per program, so that like you're also able to set goals, because the more familiar you get with the data set, the more familiar you get with like the community profile through the lens of that data set, the more you're going to be able to operate within the realm of that issue and talk about it with confidence and become an expert. So it has a lot of like secondary benefits. Not only are you able to see more clearly through your data and your needs, but also you're slowly building expertise and legitimacy when talking about it.
Yeah, I love that. Also, trust is coming up for me. How do we, from the public, because you're, kind of the expert in this public data piece, how do we trust? I mean, I think the first piece is work with a trusted partner. Because I'm almost thinking like, gosh, you're right. There is so much and we need to narrow it down. But for example, I was just writing an article, yesterday, and when I Googled something, I'm like, there's a lot of responses, but I want to give a credible resource. And that was kind of like a whole thing that I had to go through in my mind on basically defining what was credible to me. I'm going a little off script here, Charles, but I'm like just curious what trust looks like for you and knowing where these sources are, or how to discern which public data source to trust.
I mean, we always thought like we were extremely familiar with federal level data sets. So we're like, we work very frequently with the American Community Survey and the census and the CDC places data sets when it comes to like really granular, at the census tract level indicators for all sorts of afflictions and, health inequities. So those are two like really amazing go-to sources, and they both have, at least for the American Community Survey, some pretty intuitive self-serve platforms where you just input your zip codes, do a quick research on your issue area, and it's actually not a crazy jump to be able to like get strong data, even if you're not data savvy and if you're not like a data tool expert. So that's like a really good place to start. And then obviously, those federal data sets tend to get a bit generic, and oftentimes going at the state level, especially departments of education, departments of health, these big institutions oftentimes they kind of all have data sections to their websites that are like scarily underutilized because they're very rich and oftentimes offer extremely long longitudinal data. We have like states, we've worked with states that you can go back to the 90s and have like similar outcomes at the zip code level, so you can track the health of a community over 30 years, right? And this is something that is amazing, especially if you're a long-standing organization or if you're just like wanting to know exactly what is the history of the community. So that would be like a second big resource, is going to your state's government agencies. And I think the last one for me is kind of obvious, and we forget this as professionals as well, is like ask your peers, right? It's go out and like, you're in the nonprofit sector. What's beautiful is that organizations are not competitors. I mean, of course, sometimes we act that way for funding, but actually, we are working to like solve these issues and get to the root cause of things. So if you have an organization that seems like they're doing well, and you're like, what are you tracking? What is it that you're looking at? Like, what is it that or just going on their website and being like, what is their North Star? What are they working on? That this is going to give you pointers to what to look at. And then if it's cited, get the source for that.
I love that. I always recommend that organization have like your like aspire to be organization. Not because they're doing the work exactly like you, but like when you see their work and see how they're doing their work, aspire to be that. And I thank you for just noting that. A lot of times in challenging times, actually collaborating together as nonprofits to solve a lot of these challenges is the most effective approach, even though it's not the simplest. Thank you for that. I want to get into some stories. I can either give you an opportunity to have a real example here, Charles, or we can also just move on to Olivia. I'll let you guys decide. I want to get into like taking that data and really, telling a real story and getting an example from one or both of you on a real life example of how you've turned this data into a story for an organization. I know you've given some, but we want to get deeper.
Yeah, well, I was thinking about two different ones. Maybe I can tell the one that I'm more familiar with from Read to Grow, and you can take PwC with their schools in New York City. Read to Grow is an amazing early literacy org in Connecticut, and they have programs from distributing books to families that cannot afford them, and they have touch points before birth, at the hospital, and then like in the early stages of a child's life, and then also a program that with the bookmobile that goes around the state of Connecticut distributing books. And for the longest time, they had been looking at their programmatic data, and quite amazingly, very sophisticated for an organization of that size, because they were like already collecting an enormous amount of data about their programmatic impact. So like numbers of books distributed by school districts, which types of books, which types of families, but they were lacking the like more of a sophisticated reach indicator, and so we worked with them to help them like create a numerator that would be percentage of high needs kids reached in a specific community, and so we were looking at really collecting the number of high needs kids in all of these communities, and then matching that to their historical distribution numbers to come up with like a penetration rate, if like just to assess the depth of programming, and to be able to say, well, now we can look with confidence at communities that we've been in for the longest and where we have a real footprint, because we know that we are distributing 100 books a year for 100 kids in need, right? So that's like a real high like engagement number, and start looking at outcomes and see like, well, in a community that we've been in for 5, 10, 15 years, are we seeing changes in ELA scores? Are we seeing changes in kindergarten readiness? And starting to see like how for the first time an organization that was for 30 years working mostly on distribution data is now able to say, like, in communities that we've been in for 20 years, ELA scores are on the rise, right? And this is like extremely, extremely potent, not only for the culture of an organization, but also for funding and for fundraising.
That's so exciting. It's like a chicken and egg with funding.
Yeah.
It's like you want to do it to get the funding, but you need to report on it, but you need to do it before you get the funding.
Yeah.
The investment to me is always worth it. And like you said, Olivia, earlier, thank you for sharing that story. It's like I just love hearing about good work that people are doing too. It's like, oh. You were saying that too, Olivia, that it's not, you don't do it for the funders, but the funders are asking this of you because it's actually something that makes your organization stronger. This is like, if they're asking for it, it's building a foundation for you and actually running a sustainable and smart organization for all of your supporters. Did you have a story to share too, Olivia, before we dive into some more detailed questions?
Yeah, I was also gonna add one thing to Charles's story with Read to Grow, which kind of loops back to something that you asked, Krista, which is, is it a good example to go find studies that say something? It's not your measurement and evaluation, but it's a study that says something about, how a certain way of approaching an issue that worked, right? So this was actually Read to Grow's anchor for a very long time for its impact, because it knows that book distribution from birth, there's studies that show, and if a family has 100 books in the home, literacy rates increase. Literacy rates are much higher in families that have more books in their home, more access to books. And we know that one of the biggest barriers is financial and time. Families that have to work 3 jobs, etc. So they're really trying to lower the access to books because there's these studies that show that makes a big effect on literacy. And that is great. They can use these studies to say we are having impactful work because the study shows this impact and this is what we're doing, precisely this. So, when you're an organization starting out and you don't have that impact data, studies can be just as powerful to close that loop.
Thank you for giving that example, because sometimes these ideas, and now we've been talking we're having a conversation, but it's like 30 minutes of talking about it. It can feel, just for our adult learners, like it can start to get mushy.
Yes.
There is a study that says that after a certain amount of time, you need to kind of like refresh your brain, because we actually, in adult learning, uniquely enough, we lose over 50% of what we just heard within the first hour of hearing it, right? So I'm going to take a pause before we go a little deeper into your story to just remind folks that are live, that we are taking Q&A, because I saw a few folks come in a little after we made the initial announcement. You can go into the chat and share, Charles, you said it earlier, like share your ideas and where what you've been doing or where you're getting information, the impact that you've had in this conversation around data and storytelling, or ask us some questions because we are going to stop in about 10-ish minutes to address any questions if you have some. And then the other thing I was going to just share with folks is this is being recorded if you are online, and we're going to do just that. We're going to take the transcript. I'm using all these new tools to work differently and just write up some key takeaways from this talk so that you can kind of read it and absorb it in a different way a little bit later to create an action plan as well. Because I think that that can happen sometimes. We hear all of your good ideas and then we go to the next thing in our day and like, how do we actually put this into practice? Olivia, did you have another story? Or like our next theme is turning data into stories. So I'll let you kind of guide how you want to kick that section off.
Cool. Yeah. I mean, my story is one of our very first projects was partnering with a human service organization called Partnership with Children based in New York City. And they provide mental health support, trauma-informed counseling, healing arts education, all this great work in schools to help, in places where students are more likely to deal with toxic stress. So this has been the organization's story for a very long time. What is toxic stress? It is stress that is prolonged, that is structural, that is intergenerational. It's stress that is really grounded in structural racism and intergenerational poverty as its two main driving forces. So this is something that the organization has communicated for a long time. This is the problem we're solving. These are the drivers. This is what we're doing. So we weren't going in and telling a different story, but what we did was we brought them the data that backed up that story in a way that they've never seen before. So it was 3 extremely simple maps we made for them. A map that shows mental health distress at the census tract level, which is a small granularity, about 4,000 people for all of New York City. This is data that we brought in from the CDC, public data, and then showed where their schools are. And immediately you saw that they're in the schools, in the communities where mental health distress is highest in New York City.
Wow.
So there's the need, right? There's the toxic stress showing up in a really structural way. And then we mapped racial segregation. So these are the same communities that are by far 90% plus Black and Latino. You see that on the map where their schools are, the racial segregation. And then the next map shows a dot density map of children in poverty and all of the clustering around where their schools are. So now the story that they've been telling in 3 map scrolls, they have the data that backs it up. So they don't have to tell such a long story anymore. They show them the 3 maps and there's the story.
Wow. I have goosebumps head to toe, Olivia, because what I also heard in there, not only did I hear the story in just under a minute of explaining it without even seeing the map, but it also made it feel so accessible again, which is what you guys are like doing, and this is what we're talking about today is like the zip codes of your schools that you serve. This is not like some big collection exercise. So I think that that's the other thing that I keep thinking. I'm having this conversation with you. I keep thinking, oh gosh, we're gonna have to go and collect more. But I'm like, no, actually, that one's like very easy to know that information. It's just streamlining the project and layering it. Thank you for explaining how that like layers in showing the story and the impact. Wow.
It's one data set for them. It's school locations. That's it.
Wow. Because that was some of my other like questions around like I don't know if I'm even sticking to my script, but I'm like, what should we be collecting? I was thinking when you were talking about events, for example, that like knowing the zip code of the event attendees helps, and I'm like, oh well, then we need to like think about that when we're doing registration. So maybe there are some like tweaks in how we're operating so that we can collect more meaningful. And maybe that's an adjustment on some of my questions, but like, what have you seen over time that like people, you're usually like making recommendations for folks that maybe you should start collecting this now, not to add a burden, but to like, you're already collecting some information add this question? What are some of those things that, like, in terms of different data points that should be easy for them to have that they can start layering with other public data?
Mhm.
Is that a clear question?
It's a clear question, and I think that my main advice on this is something you already said, which is location data of where folks are living. And it doesn't have to be getting into personally identifiable information. You don't need to tell me your exact address, but your neighborhood, your zip code, any of these, general areas to know where they're living. Because at the end of the day, most of the inequities that we're addressing are place based. Right. So if you can speak to where folks are coming from and what do their communities, what's going on in their communities through all of the public data that you have access to, that's a huge story right there.
Yeah. I know I've worked with organizations on a national level, but zooming in on community needs over the years that, like, for example, demographic data is really important. And
Mhm.
I will say that caveat for funders, because I'm thinking about a project I did for many years with the city of San Francisco. And it was a department in the city that it was funding a lot of different programs. And I was I was a partner in all of that. But one of the things we had to do was specifically, this is just for like learning programs that we were creating. We had to collect the zip code plus demographic data of the people attending the training like this.
Mhm.
And we also needed them to fill out a separate form for the zip code of and the demographic data of the population that they were serving.
Mm.
And so I'm like, this starts to get more complicated
Yeah.
to track and also to map, if you
Right.
will. But that was important for the organization. And of course, everyone understood that. So when can you just talk a little bit about demographic data? I like how you're talking about zip code because that feels like it doesn't need a huge caveat and a survey to collect that information on why.
Yeah.
Uh, right? Like, does it, but you're able to get similar results from the zip code without necessarily asking people to identify their personal information. How do you
Totally.
feel about that? And where have you worked with organizations that it was really important for them to be mapping specific demographics to the human?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we work with a lot of human service organizations. They have intake forms. They're collecting the demographics. They're collecting a lot of this information. Um,
I would say that they are, but like for those that are the most ambitious in the data collection efforts, they always are cautious to make a lot of these fields optional. And so what they
mhm.
do is that it's a bit of a numbers game, but if they're able to say, well, even if we have 60, 70% of declines to answer, we still have a number to work from and we can extrapolate and say, well, even on 1,000 people, we have 9% of those that are X, right? And that's enough. That's already like a notion, and that's enough to talk about the community.
Mhm. Yeah, and I was going to say just, that while we do have organizations that are definitely trying, like Charles said, to collect this demographic data, um, in lieu of what you're saying, Chris, is like it's a lot more effort every single time someone signs up for something to give a whole report on who they are and where they're from and all of that. If I'm just saying, if you had to ask one thing, I think that
Yes.
neighborhood is the most important because you could always say, and people from this neighborhood are majority XYZ when you look at the public data. You don't have to get that information from them if it's going to be too much for you in the process. So
Mhm.
I'm just offering that as
So good.
a stepping stone.
No,
There's a lot
we need to
to
hear
work
it though too, because what's happened, unfortunately, and then we can get off of the sad stuff, but it's real because what's happened is people actually have lost trust in giving that information.
with. Yeah.
Mhm.
Really, and like even so, we're talking about like trust in the resources that we're bringing in to tell our story, but there's also trust the other way in people wanting to share it because we don't know exactly where it's going and what it's going to be used for. And so I just there this zip code, like if there's one big like thing I'm leaving with, it's that you guys are leaving us with is how accessible the zip code is. It doesn't put anyone in a not to say that I'm not thinking of something that would put someone in a situation to share it, but it feels so accessible to folks if they're not already collecting that.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
like you said, folks are exhausted. Like we're asked to give our feedback on if you buy a pencil and the company wants to know how was your experience. It's just so incredibly exhausting.
It
It was
that's the best part.
wonderful. So like the easiest you can make it and it doesn't. I don't find it turns off most people to give just 2 or 3 data points about themselves. So whatever you think is going to be the most important, it doesn't need to be a laundry list of things. Is the point?
Yeah, and what it sounds like you're doing is you're working with organizations kind of where they are.
Mm-hmm.
Excuse me. And that like I think that that is also a nice takeaway to just kind of like we can all exhale a little bit is that like oh no, like could we all get better and like think about this a little differently through working with you? Yes, 100%. But what you're doing is you're actually coming in and like connecting those dots. You're asking those questions that Charles was asking around like what the story is and thinking through what do we already have layered with what the public already has to actually tell this story in the best way. It's not one story though, right? Like you're working with organizations, you're zooming in on a program or an initiative, but I'm kind of wanting to move into like a little bit more of like a wrap up moment here around like your advice, like what's your advice, or how many people love numbers, like how many stories should we be doing this work for, or what's the priority that I should be focused on, mapping and telling stories for? Should it just be for chasing the funding? I think we know the answer to that.
Mm-hmm.
So what's your kind of overall advice? Maybe I'll start with you, Olivia, because I see you right in the middle on like what organizations should, kind of do today and how they should be prioritizing this type of data and storytelling in their work.
Mm-hmm. Oof, there's so many things I want to say, but I'll say something new that we haven't talked about yet, which I feel now is kind of the elephant in the room, and when talking about data, which is the use of AI. AI is presenting nonprofits with an incredible opportunity to look at the data that they have, scattered in a million different places and clean it and centralize it, and use it in a way that they've never done before, because it's extremely laborious to do all of that work by hand. But now, if you have an AI, your favorite AI tool, especially a paid version, I would recommend, because that's when it's helping a little bit with the privacy aspect of the data work. I would really, really recommend you starting to test it out, starting to give it the data that you think might be telling you something, seeing if there's ways that you can clean up that data to centralize it. I think one really fun example that I'm working on at the moment, that we're working on at the moment, is with a policy organization that wants to be able to map out their impact. So we've invited them to send us absolutely anything that they have that communicates things they've done. So pamphlets, brochures, and pictures from events. I mean, just a whole host of things
Wow.
they dumped into a shared Google Drive. And wherever we can take note of something that they did, it's a line, or they distributed all of these charter school guidance handbooks, and they've throughout all these places. Well, that's an entire data set we can create from these mentions in different grants. So we're looking at grants and from the past, 20 years, pulling out mentions of things that they've done and creating that as a row in a spreadsheet that then is going to get mapped. So, and using AI to help us with identifying and some of that data cleaning.
So
Yeah.
you're reconstructing historical data sets from fragments, and that can take that would have taken weeks, like of archive
And humans.
Yes.
archival work, whereas now you can, and also be pretty blurry about what you're trying to achieve. It's like, we have this, like, first let's synthesize and understand what we're working with. Like, give me a synthesis of the body of work, and then from there, like, what are questions that you see, and working iteratively, but not having to like be a complete control of everything that's like the inputs, but then really guiding the output work. And that's been like fantastic to do that work of research, and that's really just a conversation.
I love it. I love anything right now that's, again, giving us tips on how to use it, that's not decreasing our current staff, but adding capacity. And you're right, we wouldn't be able to have that kind of archival project normally,
Yeah,
with the regular staff that are kind of moving the ship forward every day. But why not put a percentage of time, or bring in an outside expert to help kind of streamline that? Is it streamlining your work? This is also like, now I'm like, I mean, now it's almost like you could, I don't know, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but are you able to take on different clients because it streamlines how you're able to help them as well?
For
yeah,
sure.
for sure.
Yeah, I think we're in two ways, like able to synthesize a lot more information for them. So this organization, I mean, they sent me 200 files, a lot of which I am reading with my own eyes. But when
Yeah.
it comes to actually synthesizing it in a way that provides a clean data set, it's an iterative process with an AI tool going back and forth to get that clean data set, which is, we would have never been able to do that before.
Yeah, I recently did a very short engagement with this small organization, and I realized as I'm learning it that I could actually provide them more for their time with me. That's
Mhm.
how I found AI to kind of be a solution. Like, I still did all of the hourly work, but I was able to provide them so many more resources because of the synthesizing and the research components that helped me pull that together, which I wouldn't have been able to do. It would have taken me 5+ more hours. I have a question. We've got a question in the chat.
Great.
Okay, they're saying this is great. And thank you, Charles and Olivia. Yes, thank you both. On the topic of collecting data, they're curious what kind of conversations you've had with nonprofits about the quality. It kind of came up, but I think it would be great to like hear an example, or some tidbits on the quality of their data. And then the second question is, any go-to recommendations for organizations to improve their data quality in order to make their claims accurate, right? To get a kind of preventively get ahead of it before diagnosing it after the fact.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I mean, something we see a lot in the field now, especially big nonprofits, is they're working on their first CRM, so their first organizational wide place where they're going to start storing all their data, their database, right? Before it was all in all these spreadsheets, but it takes a big effort and to centralize that data to get everyone on board to using this new platform in a way that's going to keep the data current and make sense. But you know, um, we think it is a good investment. Charles can maybe tell me if I'm right, but I think, having some centralized place where everyone, and it doesn't need to be a Salesforce right now. It could really be like an extremely well organized Google Drive that people are knowing where to put things. It's not just living on their computer or here or there. I think just the process of centralizing data and keeping it organized is an amazing first step to get really good quality data.
I mean, the fact that you're saying that tells me that it's not happening regularly,
Yeah.
right? And that like there's also a value around, from this kind of fundraiser mindset, or from like an organization leadership, that it's like it's the organization's information, not the person that's putting it on their desktop's information too. So there's also just, some best practices in, to your point, like organizing it well, but also making sure that it stays within the organization for the organization's legacy. So that I love archival projects like that. Sometimes I love going into organizations as a new person and like digging back to see what happened 10 or 20 years ago.
Mhm.
And that's all part of an onboarding for future staff stories too, so that they can kind of pick up where folks have left off as well. Charles, anything to add to Arden's question?
Yeah, I think on this exact thread, I think an even easier, like having naming conventions for your files.
Ugh,
So
that's
like
a good
being
one.
like, so you have 200 files that we received, and they're like you could never say from the title what it's about, right? Like it's, which is crazy. So being able to say like like at least the program, the constituency area, the year makes it into the title, you know, on top of like what it is actually about. That's one thing. And one thing that we see really, really oftentimes, which is a super easy fix for anyone doing like digital intake forms, is not offering free text. So when you're saying like, you know, what is my nationality, or what language do I speak, or which city do I come from, like offering a drop down, not like typing in text. Um, just because you're going to get a lot of different spellings, right? And this is and that when comes the time to aggregate and ingest that into a report, that's going to take hours to fix. Even though again you can do that now a bit more a bit faster, but that's a really easy way to make sure that like you leave the free text for open-ended questions, but anything that can be answered through a preset list needs to be.
Fantastic. I was thinking about when you say convention, because I kind of geek out about conventions sometimes too, in concept, but you'll ask my colleagues and be like, I created the convention, but do I stick to it?
Yeah.
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 Sometimes it's hard because like even in our work we actually like will pull things to the desktop on purpose because it's more secure when you're presenting a deck, for example. So it's putting it into practice
Mhm.
that I think sometimes can be a little more challenging. I'm seeing some people in the chat potentially typing, so I want to give them a second, but we are kind of at time. So while I'm waiting to see if there's one more question come in, can I ask you both to kind of leave us with a final thought, either on what's a mindset shift? Again, there's one thing to like get all of your ideas. There's another thing to put it into practice, either a mindset shift recommendation or any kind of final thoughts for our smaller to mid-sized organizations that you think will leave them feeling empowered to continue their data storytelling journey.
Mm-hmm.
Who wants
I'll
to go
just
first?
say find your internal champion, like whoever is on your staff that geeks out over data or really sees the value of it, even if they're scared. We've worked with so many people that become the internal champion and they're like, I'm not a data person. And then they really love it and they end up like, because they see the value of it, right? So they see the value, they're scared, they go in for it, and then they become the champion. So it's the person that's going to remind the rest of the staff every month, did you update the file? Did you upload your files? Did you upload your presentations? Like that one person that's going to keep everyone, on the path. And the last thing I wanted to mention, just as like a mini plug, because it's something that's so important to us, we have a whole newsletter devoted to giving these tips to nonprofits on our website, north-arrow.org. Our newsletter is called Making Space because that's the wink at a lot of the geography that we do. And next month, we're releasing a newsletter on how to use AI to answer questions like, what is my impact? So we will provide some AI prompts. We'll run you through an example of an actual, going from A to Z of answering that question.
Oof, so good. Yeah, I will vouch for one of my favorite subscriptions in my inbox right now. So
Thanks,
thank you
Krista.
guys for that. I'm going to just read Michelle's comment out loud for those folks that can't see it. She says, this consistency point is so good. I'm working with an organization to help its development team improve the use of their CRM. The CEO came into a very messy set of giving data and therefore created a very good Google Sheets workbook. This has helped the development team and its work immensely. Now it's convincing them to use it as a roadmap, of course, and upgrade the use of their CRM to reflect this. Yes, 100%. I don't think we have time for the advice on this, but you know how to contact Charles and Olivia if you want to dive into that conversation a little deeper to user expertise and services. Thank you both so much. This has been rich with, as I said, learning for myself, and also those kind of really key tidbits that I think we can all take away from that are very accessible that we can use today. So thank you both for sharing your knowledge, for sharing your stories, and for really sharing your passion for doing the work for the ones that need it the most.
Yeah, thanks
Thank
for
you,
having
Krista.
us.
Thank
Thanks
you so
for
much. Thank you for listening
facilitating,
in.
yeah, a really fun conversation.
Appreciate you all. We'll see you on the other side.